Okay, I lied. I did not do heaters first. So the whole idea is, this thing, when it's done being built, it's going to be what people who don't know how to build these things call a rat's nest. But this whole thing is essentially point to point. And when you go on point to point, you've got to build the bottom stuff first and then build up from there. As soon as I was like, oh, wait, I got stuff I got to do before I do the heaters. First thing I did was I rewired the wires going to this balance pot for the cathodes on the power tubes. And then I ran a wire from those to these lugs that I'm using as test points. Then I took this 70 volt tap from the output transformer. I snipped the tip flush so there was no wire sticking out past the jacket. I covered the tip with a little bit too much shrink tubing. I shrunk it down, then I take the tip of the shrink tubing and fold it over. That way it kind of seals the wire in there. Then I take the wire and I fold it in half and I stick it in this larger thing of shrink tubing. And so now it's dead and it's not going to short to anything. It's safe and it's not going to get used. All right, then I went through and I wired all of the wires that go to this tag strip on the back here. I wired the one wire that goes to the center of the bias pot, this 10K linear pot. I wired the ground wires for the speaker output. It's got those. I wired the two ground lugs that, there's a ground lug here and here. I wired those together. And then I wired those to the chassis right here. And I sanded the chassis and put a screw with one of these locking tabs. And I screwed that down nice and tight. And I also wired ground to these two alternate outputs, the one that goes to the external output transformer and then the one that goes to the tape/booster. And I also went through and went ahead and connected these leads to this thing. I'm going to come back to that after I do the heaters. But for now, I'll go ahead and actually do the heaters. That's the next step. Now you can see where I've installed the heater wiring. It's got it right here, from tube socket to tube socket. And I also disconnected the wire coming off of the transformer and I wrapped it tighter. You want your wire to be nice and tight. This helps with home rejection. The wire going for the pilot light was also really loose, and I wrapped that nice and tight too. The next step is I'm going to go ahead and start building the high voltage rails. And that starts with these two leads. This is the high voltage coming out of the transformer. There is no center tap on this secondary, so I'm making a full wave bridge, which consists of 4 diodes. Imagine it like a diamond. If it was a baseball diamond, imagine home plate and second base connect to these 2 wires. And then first base is positive and third base would be your negative, and that's what gets grounded. I'll go ahead and install 4 diodes here, and then I'll run a wire to the capacitor. There'll be a resistor that goes in between them. This connects to the very first leg. And then the second leg will go to the grid 2 of the power tubes. Then there'll be a 10K resistor, and that goes to the phase inverter and the driver tube that drives the phase inverter. And then there'll be another 10K resistor, and that will run to the second stage audio frequency amplifier, which is essentially in front of the tone stack. And then it'll also go to both stages of the preamp. The preamp is actually 2 channels. The preamp tube is split into 2 triodes. One triode is going to be essentially my guitar or lead channel, and the other is my bass or rhythm channel. And there is a provision to jumper them together so that they can work together. I've got most of the high voltage rails installed. You can see right here, this is first stage, which goes to the center tap of the output transformer and is then sent to the plates of both output tubes. And this is the second stage, which goes to these 2 500 ohm resistors, which go to grid 2 of the power tubes. I also use this voltage divider circuit and then stick the center tap for the heaters in the middle. So I've got a 220K resistor from there to the where the center tap is wired, and then I have a 10K resistor plus a 50 microfarad cap in parallel going to ground. I installed the diodes here, and the capacitor you see under here is part of the bias circuit. It taps into one of the legs, and then it runs that through a capacitor, and then there's a resistor, and then a reverse diode to make it negative voltage. And then there's 2 stages of resistance and filtering, and then that feeds the bias pot, which is then connected to my test point so that I can see what the voltage is, and then that goes to my bias. So I did more than just the high voltage rails. I also did the bias circuit, and I also did the voltage divider for this heater center tap. And I haven't soldered this yet because this still needs to run the rails for the 3 preamp tubes. So I still got to run those. That's the next step I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and do those, and then I'm going to run grounds for the whole thing, which means I always run ground to these little center lugs, and then I'm going to run grounds to all the pots, and then, yeah, that's what I'll be doing. All right, I got the grounds wired in there, and I also, at the same time, went ahead and put in the shielded wiring for the inputs. That's 4 different lines. There's 1 for each of the high impedance guitar and bass inputs. And there's also 2 for the aux. One thing I did here, the aux grounds to 1 point for the 2 wires. And where I connected it to the aux connector, I snipped the ground wire, the shielding for one of them, and only connected the other. That way I don't get a ground loop. The switch used to select between the magnetic input here and the other high impedance input here. Instead now, this switch either grounds the switch. So this is a 1/4 inch jack, and it has a positive connector, a ground connector, and then it has a switch that when there's nothing plugged in, it's automatically shunted to the positive. And then when you plug a jack into it, it lifts it. It lifts it from the shunt. When I lift this, see that piece of metal there? It's no longer connected. So when there's nothing plugged into here, what you can do is with this switch, you can short this input to this input. So I've also got another 10K resistor going to this one so that, again, it doesn't pick up any extra noise from this. Right? So if you have a guitar plugged into here and you want to use both channels simultaneously, you flip the switch on, and now both volume 1 and volume 2 will both control the sound because you're effectively going into both of them, and then they're being mixed back into mono after the gain stages, after the first gain stage for each. So they're running in parallel with each other. Hope that makes sense. The grounds for all the pots are all wired in there, and then they're wired to these posts. I also went ahead and put these on here. I did not have a 150 picofarad, but I did have a 100 and a 47, so I put them in parallel on here. And what that does is when you've got the guitar turned down, it doesn't dull the high frequencies. It helps compensate for the high frequencies that you lose when you have the gain turned down, especially on a high gain channel. So for a lead guitar channel, that's very helpful. It's really nice when you've got it turned way down and you're trying to keep them at the nice chimey high end. Another place where I'm going to do that, where I put these caps in parallel, is going to be in the tone stack, and I'll show you that because I don't have a 500 picofarad, which I need, but I do have 2 250s. So those will go in parallel. The next step is going to be, I will start with the phase inverter and work backwards to the input. Along the way, I'm going to add the high voltage rails for the 3rd and 4th stages. Well, so I got a little carried away, and I went ahead and finished up. The thing is, I really bounced around a bunch, and there wasn't really a good stopping point. I mean, there was no point in me stopping just to show you, I've already done this. This is what you call point to point. And when you're doing point to point, it just turns into a rat's nest and everything's kind of jumbled. I had to jump around. I actually started with the pots, wiring those up. Then I did the EQ stuff over here. Then I jumped around to the 1st stage. Then I did some 2nd stage, Then I went back and finished up the first stage. Then I did some of the phase inverter. Then I jumped back and did some more of this wiring here. Then I did the feedback loop. I just did a bunch of different things here, and now it's mostly done. I say mostly done because it's been assembled. I'm very tired. I'm going to go ahead and call it a day. Tomorrow I'll come back. I'll do my pre-flight check, and that involves me checking all my grounds. I'll plug it in with no tubes and just check and make sure that the voltages that are spitting out are correct. And then I'll tube it up and hook up a speaker and see what's going on. If all that checks out, then we'll do the last video where I get a buddy of mine to play a bunch of guitar through it and maybe some bass through it too. Like I said, this thing's a multi-purpose amplifier. You should be able to do guitar or bass or keyboards or any number of things. Well, so that's it for right now. Sorry about the cricket in the background there. I don't know how loud he's going to turn out. Maybe you can't hear him at all, but I bet you can. See? It's a little late. It's cricket time. But okay, y'all. So that's it. This is the Bogen CHB-50. And I'll be back here after I'm done checking it out, and then we can do a little fun. You know, it's what it's all about. It's playing music through this thing. All right, catch you on the flip side.